Today we're going to be looking at our activities webinar, giving you an introduction to the world of activities and all the ways that you can create a sort of mass relationship inside of Vernon between your processes and object. So if we start by thinking about what activities is, they're an optional extra that you can add to Vernon CMS on top of your cataloging module. So these help you manage processes around your objects like exhibitions and loans and de-accessioning and acquiring objects and risk management and so many more things. We'll have a look at each type of activity and we'll talk about different ways they can be used. And we're also going to look at how objects can be related to activities and also how activities can relate to each other. So you can create this like hive of activity. It's a lot of words of activity in this. I warn you already, there will be much usage of the word. So if we start, you can find our activities on the left-hand navigator on the side. We've got acquisition proposal, condition report, de-accession, entry, exhibition, exhibition venue, exit, insurance, inward loan, inward rights, reproduction and usage, outward loan and outward rights, reproduction, risk management, topic, transport movement, treatment. It's a lot of options to run through. So we'll have a start at the beginning with acquisition proposal. So our acquisition proposal helps you track that process of deciding when something gets added to your collection. So the details about who donated it still reside inside the object, but this lets you track suggestions. So someone might come to you and say, I have a big collection of items that I'd like to offer to you. You might not know whether you're ready to process it. So you can take all of their details down into source, all of their contact information. You could say that, you know, this is a proposed accession, the number of items and the description about each one, any valuation notes you have about it. And then in the administration, you can say, well, who actually is in charge of this? What's the registrar in charge? Who's proposing that we accept this? What's their reasonings? And then finally, has it been approved? Is this going to be going through? So you actually step your objects and this discussion and this record through the process that you use your organization. So when it's completely finished, all the objects will be attached, the sign accession agreements will all be linked to this. You can hop into those windows by clicking on this button at the top, which will open up the objects and activities window. This is the same window we use for all of our activities. You can also get to it from these side windows. So if I open up an example one, we can see this is a proposed acquisition that is of a series of aphids. And it's got details on each of those. And we can see who signed off on it and what department's responsible for it. And yeah, so the benefit of this is each of those objects will have a link back to this acquisition proposal as well. So if I wanted to see that object, I can click on it and use the go to see the apple aphid. So we can see here that for our Vernon demo system, we've decided to make them object records and mark them as considered items. So they're not fully accessioned, but we have individual records for them. You might decide to do it differently and have just a list in the description of everything you want. But it can be very useful to fill in some rudimentary details, especially if you physically hold them while you're making your decision, because then you can track location and all of the wonderful detail you get, like condition reports in the object file. So in order to see how this one relates back to acquisition proposal, there's a window called Management Activities. And this shows us all of the activities it's linked to, which for this one is just acquisition proposal. We can see a schedule for when this is happening. So we can see that this happened in 2011. Gosh, we should really update our demo. And our update is where we can actually continue to add other activities to this object, or we can change the details about this. Say it's linked to the wrong acquisition proposal. So you can manage your activities in a sort of reciprocal relationship, right? You don't just have to do it from the activity to the object. You can do it from object back to activity. So there's lots of flexibility in how you enter that and how you find those data, that data. So that's a real quick tour of acquisition proposal. You might have noticed on the side here that we have our objects and activities window. We also have something called correspondence history, which does occur in object as well. We don't have any here, but this might be really useful if you've had phone conversations with a potential donor or you've had emails back and forth. You can actually create correspondence and link it to the acquisition proposal because it's talking about all of those objects, not each one. And that means you have a history of your correspondence with the source. We also can add documents. So that's that document references window. So you can add any type of external file. So that could be high quality images. It could be signed documents. It could be all sorts of agreements, or even just something that someone did recently was they've been uploading auction reports, and they've been putting those details in here as well. So gives you the flexibility to keep all your documentation linked to the objects and to the activity. Again, there's also photo, audio, visual, so you can add pictures relevant to that acquisition. It might not be per object. You might take just a bulk lot photo of everything in that collection. You have diary and tasks and their costs, so you can actually assign tasks to people. So that might be that if it's going to be acquired, you have to write a condition report, so you could assign here we go, there's ownership verification or photography required as examples, but one of those could be that you need to write a condition report. And so you can say who has to do that and what date is due, and also any cost associated with it. So if you are looking at proposing to buy something, you can actually put in what the estimated cost is, what your absolute maximum budget is at auction, and then what you actually spent. So you can track a whole lot of information about that too. So we'll leave acquisition proposal and head down into condition report, the next one on our list. So in our condition report, we have, you can still record an object's condition. So if we go to the object window, we can have a current condition description, condition and acquisition, all the details about the condition of an object. The condition report might be for multiple objects. They might be needing to be much more detailed. The benefit of having a condition report is it puts a timestamp on it. When you're in here, the current condition description is for the object and it's just at that time what is current. But you don't necessarily get that history of what the condition was in a specific year or time or for an exhibition. So using that activity gives you a chance to say, well, this was the condition and it was requested by, and it was done on this date to this date. And so you actually can build a history of an object's condition in a much more clear way. And you can see again a history of all of that condition reports and that management activity files. So you're able to track recommendations that have been made for the object and whether you've actually fulfilled that, and compare previous condition reports to current ones. So if we look at an example of that one, we've got ones that were approved by the conservator. They wrote their entire general condition and they've linked the objects to it, which we can see here. We can also see with that button that there's another activity linked to it. So in our objects table, we have all of our objects. We click over to activities and we can see, well, this condition report was done because of an inward loan. So this was the 3 objects that were loaned, and they all had a condition report, and the condition report was for all 3 items. So rather than having to update the current condition on each object, one condition report was made for all 3 objects and linked back to that inward loan. Lovely. If we head over to de-accession. So this is the brother of acquisition proposal, the end of the line for objects. And sometimes this is something you really need to document because you end up having to justify why you removed something from your collection, often a lot more than you justify accessioning something. So for deaccession, you can record all the details about when it was requested, what method was chosen, what the items were, any sort of recommendations or approval details, or general flags. Again, you can list your objects, who it was given to, and the date of release and release notes. And again, you can attach documents and photos and any sort of justification that you require to say what happened to these objects when they were deaccessioned. Helps you follow that life cycle. So I think we have one in here. So this is, again, a proposed deaccession. Hasn't gone through. We've just had it proposed. It's we've just had it proposed, and it still has to be approved by the staff in charge. So it's a good way of flagging that something is going through a review, that you're looking at it and deciding whether it's appropriate or not. And so we can see here that they've decided that maybe we should keep it. Yeah, so it gives you that space to think about these options. And again, in that objects table, you actually can say, well, no, we're going to keep these, so you can move them into rejected / they're not, they're not going to be considered anymore for deaccession. Lovely. On to entry. And while we're looking at entry, we'll look at its other half, which is exit. So entry and exit are often like temporary receipts. They're used to track things coming into your organization and also leaving. Sometimes it's best to think of these for tracking when loans arrive and when loans are leaving, and they haven't necessarily made it back to the organization, or you're flagging that you've given them to the courier, essentially, right? Some people use this as well to track things that aren't objects but might be props, or they just need to say, we borrowed this item. We don't really want to say that it's a collection object, but we will be putting through sort of a receipt to say we did get it and we did send it on. So an example of that. So in this case, we've had a receipt prepared, and it's going to Mike Austin, and it says 3 model trains, and they'd left. So they came into the organization and then they left as well. The benefit of Vernon is you can have an automatic word merge report that fires up. And that means as soon as you make an entry, you can print off a temporary receipt. Exhibition and exhibition venue. So this one is something that was developed to help museums handle blockbuster exhibitions at the time. Sort of built at the time, the peak of everyone having giant traveling exhibitions around the world. And so that's kind of influenced how Vernon's exhibition design has been made. You'll notice we have 2 separate exhibition files. They work together in concept together. So like if I look up Crown Lynn, so we have an exhibition concept, and then we have a venue. So in this example, our concept is an external traveling exhibition for Crown Lynn whiteware, so pottery exhibition. And this went to multiple places. It didn't just stay at our organization. We hosted it for a little bit. So we can see here that this one went to the Portage Trust Museum, and it also went to the Vernon Museum. So that's why it's been separated into 2 parts. It's acknowledging this is the same concept, right? But it's gone to different locations. So that's how our exhibition has been formed. You can use this for your own exhibitions, absolutely. What you end up doing is you just put in an exhibition concept and then just one venue with all the details and objects that are linked to it. But it does give you that flexibility if you ever end up partaking in a traveling exhibition to move your objects to a different location, to a different exhibition, and see how that works. The thing I found personally really beneficial using exhibitions as a user, I loved being able to add photos of that exhibition, because It meant that I could see how the cases were laid out. So when I was checking back through the exhibit, I could see if something was damaged or had been moved or had changed from its original setup. I also could keep records, of all the objects, but I could attach a file of all the props. So when it came to deinstalling, I knew what was a collection object immediately and what was a prop object. It also meant that I could have an exhibition history for my objects get built. I could see, again, same with condition report, the list of all of those exhibitions over time, growing and growing with dates and places, and I could see when something had been perhaps over exhibited. And I could also use that rejected considered object field, which was really great because sometimes my exhibition team or I myself might have considered some objects for exhibition and then decided we wouldn't go ahead with them because they were not in enough good condition, or they didn't fit the exhibition properly in the end, or it was deemed too difficult to move them. And so that's actually really important information to know, because if you end up considering those objects in future for more exhibitions, it's quite handy to know you didn't go ahead last time because the condition was not great. So flagging them as rejected objects gives you sort of that detail as to why something wasn't used, and prepare you from going down the same road again a few years later. Cool. Insurance. So insurance is used to track the financial end of things, and we don't often deal with that in many ways, but sometimes you might have a loaned object that needs a specific insurance value or agreement. You might also have an exhibition that has a specific insurance, or you might have your insurance for your entire collection and you want to record that with your collection objects. So this is where you can record your policy notes, your insurers. If something goes wrong, who are you actually going to contact in an emergency? It's a really good way of if there is a natural disaster and you need to start working through your insurance, do you know what you have to do? Do you know who you have to contact? What's your policy numbers? All those things that sit in the back of the mind when we know we have insurance, but are we actually keeping it somewhere that we can find regularly and quickly? I can just see I've had a message pop up. Can this be used for insurance claims? Yeah, absolutely. So you could record the policy notes and the insurers and the coverage, and then in the details, you could put in actually insurance claims. I'd be tempted to use risk management to say something's happened. This is the details of everything that happened, and then link to the insurance policy that might state what they covered and how much for. And you can see here there's like different values you can do for your activities and document references. I hope that sort of answered your question. We'll be going through risk management in a bit, but I would do a two-parter. If you end up claiming for insurance, that's generally because something's happened, right? Some risk has had to be managed. Oh, awesome, sweet. Inward loan, I'm going to open this up with its other partner, outward loan. It's a noisy day in the office today. Got a bit of construction going on next door, and apologize. So this is one of the most popular activities we have. People often buy activities for inward and outward loan because it's one of the more difficult parts of tracking collection objects, because they're not technically part of your collection. They often have even more protection in some ways, because you have signed legal agreements that you need to keep on hand. You have to return them by a certain time. There's all of that legal rigmarole that you have to deal with. You have to figure out copyright. You have to figure out a whole lot of things in the processes of a loaned object. So this is one of the most popular parts, because it gives you the ability to list, hey, we're proposing this loan, or this loan is currently happening, or this is an old loan. The details of the lender or the borrower, when does it start and end? When is it going to be reviewed? Because you might decide to extend your loans. Who's requested it inside the organization, all of those details. And then Vernon gives you the option to renew loans. So once you create an old loan agreement, you can choose to renew it when it gets close to expiring, and it creates a new loan record, but it copies all the details over. So you can just set the new dates and you start that new agreement, and you can put in that renewed loan agreement. So you can still track that all together. If we have a look at some examples, I think we've got, here we go, a renewed loan has been generated from this one. We can see that it was in 2004 to 2009. If we go to number 5, we can see that these objects have been fully received. So it has been returned back as the status that they've decided to use. You can make whatever statuses you would like, but it does help you track, even if there's conditions to the loan, like no reproductions are allowed, you can put those conditions to the loan here. Again, you can use that document references window to attach your loan agreements, those signed forms. Some sites use this to generate a loan agreement. So if I go into Word Merge, you can see here an inward loan agreement form. Inward rights, reproduction and use, and outward rights, reproduction and use. So this is becoming more pertinent as we go further into into our era. Copyright, in short. This is often what manages your copyright. So especially for art galleries, you're trying to track down your artists and get copyright agreements from them to allow you to put their collections on websites. It could be that you have orphaned works where they're probably out of copyright, but you can't know for sure because you don't know when the maker made them. Using inward and outward rights gives you the flexibility to sort of track the copyright status of groups of objects in bulk. So for inward rights, you can start saying, well, these are ones that we know we don't necessarily hold copyright for. Who is the people that are using it? And you could say that they're orphaned and you've got to do investigation. So there was also intended use and agreement. So if you do know the copyright holder, you can say, well, they've agreed for us to use it for marketing materials, but we're not allowed to use it for the shop. And you can put in all of the details about when the agreement was signed. But you can also have research and comments and remarks, and that's really important because often when you have an orphaned copyright work, you do have to show that you put effort into finding the original copyright owner. And the key word is there, you have to show that you've done that. So how do you show that without having it stored somewhere? You can't be like, I just did a Google search. Having a database gives it such a credibility lend to say, well, we did do research, we did go down this avenue, we investigated our orphaned works, we found, and you put your comments about what you did discover or didn't discover in here linked to the objects in bulk. Outward rights is where you might own the copyright, or at least you are managing your reproductions is probably the more common part. So you might have photographs that people have requested higher resolution copies of, or artworks that you're wanting to have used in books. Here's where you can list who has requested this, what they're hoping to do, what type of reproduction you've given them, what they intend to do with it, how many quantities, did you invoice them for it? If it did, who was it sent to? And you can use that task and the cost to say how much income was generated from your reproductions. So some sites are using this to track how much money they make from their reproductions. They use tasks and their costs, and they total it up at the end of each year to see how much income they've made from their reproductions. So lots of potential here with anything to do with copyright and reproductions. I always like to think these ones are the CYA, cover your ass. They're good for protecting you. Risk management was one I just talked about earlier. So risk management is a new activity. It's something we released in 12.3, I believe. And it's to help you manage when things go wrong. So when there's a natural disaster, when there's flooding, when an object breaks, when it gets stolen, when you discover that it's made out of hazardous material and you have to try and figure out a way to transport it to somewhere. It could even be used for pest checks. So you said that we've had a routine pest check and we found 3 rats in this location. So there's a range of things people can use this for. But it's just really good that you can say something's high priority. When did it happen? When did it end? You know, the risk hazard types could be it was explosive, there was a fire, that's a health hazard, theft or hydrochloric acid. Where is it? How much of it is there? So that's really useful for if you're trying to track asbestos in your collection. Or for some hazardous goods, you need to know how much of it you have. So you can start doing the measurements. Who's responsible for that? So this has also been used for firearms. Some people have firearms in their collections and they need to know exactly who it is and who's in charge. Sometimes it's useful to have risk management to say, well, if something goes wrong, who do we have to have in place for these types of things? And again, that could be like your insurance claim, right? You put in the details of why you're claiming your insurance into risk management and you link to your insurance policy from here. There's also recommendations on how to manage that risk. So if it was a broken object, recommended treatment. If it's a hazardous material, it has recommended storage. If it's got specific handling components because it's incredibly fragile and also deadly, museums get to have the best of all worlds when it comes to fragile and deadly things. Yeah, so that it's kind of just meant to cover when things go wrong or could go wrong and what your response was, and being able to know at the end of the day where your staff were sitting and what happened to your objects as well. So it does a nice complement to probably the health and safety documents you have to fill out for your HR components. But, you know, ultimately those aren't object focused. This is saying what's happened to the objects and the collections team's management of those objects. So is this more incident reporting than initial risk management? So yeah, it can be. It can be different purposes. It could be based on the procedural status. So you could have it be it's been an incident, or something's been confirmed, or it's been requested that there's a review. You could also add ones of like potential hazards. And so nothing has happened, but you want to be clear as to what might fit into that category. So you can link it back to specific objects without objects and activities, or you could do groups using your search and link a whole bunch of objects together. So some people do it for thousands of objects end up in activities, object links, and then they all show back up on their management activities. So could it be used as part of an assessment process? Absolutely. I think it would be really nice to use it in that way. What do you have that is a hazard? What's, you know, working through it and saying these are identified risks and these aren't. Yeah, it might be that they end up having low priority or high priority or medium priority, or things that you need to flag or tasks that you need to do. It just gives you that, it's kind of a blank slate so that you can be flexible with what your processes are and how you want to handle it. I hope that answered the question. Topic is a personal favorite of mine, so I'll try not to rant about it too long. I do love it. So topic is another example where it's a blank slate. It's designed to be the linchpin of Vernon in many ways. It collects together objects under a larger subject or topic. So some sites use this to record exhibition wall labels. Others use it to record education plans. Some might use it to just group together everything in their collection that, I mean, for example, everything to do with, like at Auckland Museum, it might be everything to do with earthquakes or everything to do with the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ, wrong way around. And then you can group like objects together and put in descriptions and summaries about why this is important, what the history of those objects might be. It's kind of connects really nicely to the event module in the cataloging module. Again, if you've got an object from the Titanic, for example, you wouldn't want to go into the whole history of the Titanic because it's not what that object is about. That's what the topic is. So you can go and tell the whole story of the Titanic in a topic and link to the items, individual items that help to tell that story. Most recently, we've been using it in our Vernon browser. I think Motat's online already. So this is an example of what they've done. It's the story of Cliff Tate, and they've made a topic for it. And they've linked all of the objects below. So this is all of the items that are to do with Cliff and his exploits around the world. So they've actually made almost like the topic file become a blog or a space to share more information about the objects. So lots of details about it, references to where they found it, and then the objects that they were discussing. So it kind of gives you that storytelling space inside of Vernon, if that makes sense. Another one is maybe looking after the Auckland Harbour Bridge. So this is using Vernon browser. They tell the story of the Auckland Harbour Bridge, and then they link to the objects that are relevant to that theme, to that topic. So back into Vernon. So topic gives you that flexibility to share just why the stories, it just gives you the place to share the stories and to link all of those things together. And so you can link subject, people and places and objects and dates and other events and periods. So it's just the main connector in many ways of all of that data that's around. So it's a really great curatorial space. I promise not to go on too long about topic. I love it. It's one of my favorite parts. So I will leave it before I start getting into my next big, long-windy, passionate debate about it. And we'll move on to transport and movement. So transport and movement, I like to think of as a way of tracking when a move is particularly difficult or requires external people to help, or you are needing to move something by a courier. The benefit of storing it in here is because it's not moving internally on your site. You're putting in, where did it leave from to where did it go? You can put in what locations it was going to, who was in charge of it, what reason and method. And then, you can put details in about the contractor or the courier. I've previously used it to be like, never use these people again. They broke things. Or, it's just a way of keeping that record of a difficult movement. So if it ever needs to be repeated again, people aren't starting from scratch. They have all that knowledge that, hey, to move this item, I might need a forklift, or hey, to move this item, I need the custom crate that was built for it. So that's where you can put that packing unit detail in. And again, you can link photos from the move and any documents that were made to plan it. People also use this to track movement requests. So they have used this as a way of timing the stress of movement on the collections team. So anyone who wants something to be moved has to lodge a request that is proposed from here to here. The collections team then decides whether to approve this or not. A date is then set and then it's agreed upon. And so some organizations use this as a slowdown mechanism to track movement requests and make sure that it, everyone's turn is lodged, that there's no conflicts of dates in the calendar. It's proposed and then the collections team have to decide to approve it before they can go any further. So that can also be an internal tool that people use depending on the size of your organization. Treatment is the other side of condition, way back in the beginning. This is when something physically happens to the object. I like to think that this is often written by conservators, or if something has undergone a repair or a cleaning or something like that, the object details should absolutely be uploaded, but it's similar to the condition report, right? We're building a history of the treatments that have happened to this object. You're getting what happened at a specific date. You know exactly who was involved, what happened to make this treatment begin? Is it related to a condition report? Has there been any extra analysis done? Are there future recommendations? So a lot of this might end up back on object again, but it does give you that time stamp. So in future, another treatment might be done, but it doesn't supersede that this has happened. Yeah, so that's the whirlwind tour of all of those activities. I thought before we finish, I thought we could create a few examples of some of these activities and show how they can relate together. So I thought I'd start with creating an exhibition by creating an exhibition concept and a new venue. So bear with me as I type frantically for different things. So we've had a request to do a Rodney Fumpston Rodney, so I'm going to say the exhibition code is EXH001. It's going to be an in-house. Sorry, I'll put that again. EXH001. It's going to be an in-house. Not traveling. These are just example terms that our demo system has made. Your system might have something very different. We might say it's Rodney Fumpston. A retrospective is the title. And then we could put in a whole bunch of details about the brief description. The Vernon Systems Museum is going to be the organizer of this. And their role is they're going to be, let's say chief. That sounds fun. The purpose of this is promotional, and we could say that Bill Vernon has approved this director today, and so that's been proposed. So we can save that, and I could then say, well, actually, it's been approved because Bill's gone and approved it. So now that I have that concept ready, I can make that exhibition venue. So we know already that it's proposed, but we can move it to accepted afterwards. I know that it's the Rodney, so I can type in Rodney and it brings back my exhibition. So this is creating that relationship between the two exhibitions. This is going to be held at Vernon Systems Example Museum. And it's going to open in May 2022, and it will theoretically close in May 2024. So it'll be open for 2 years. We can absolutely fill in all the rest of that detail, but for now, I'm going to save that, close the concept, and come back to that venue. So I now know it's approved, and I want to add some objects to it. So I can click on that objects and say, well, actually, I want anything that's been made by Rodney to be included automatically. My exhibition team has come back with a list of all of those works that he has that we want to have on display. And on top of that, they've also told me that there's 2 items that they want me to loan in from another organization. So now that I have my exhibition venue saved, I want to make an inward loan. So I'm going to save this record and we'll come back to it in a little bit. So my exhibition team has told me that there's an inward loan that they want me to get. That's going to be 2 paintings by Rodney Fumpston from the same person. So at this point, it's proposed. I haven't gone through and signed any loan agreements or done all of the rest of the discussions. I know that it's a short-term loan. It's only going to be for 2 years. And I could say that it has a loan number of 001. This is going to be coming from Paul Rowe, who has 2 Rodney Fumpston paintings. And the proposed dates will have to be before the exhibition starts, which is May 2022, almost got that wrong. So we could say we'll have it from April 2022 till just after the exhibition closes, which was in May 2024. So we'll have it until June 2024. That's too many twos. We can put in details about who agreed, what conditions they have, any other details that they require. And we don't have any objects at this point to relate, but we do want to add that exhibition, right? Because we're only doing this loan because it's linked to that exhibition. So we click on activities and we're saying, well, we're putting in the venue and I'm wanting the Rodney Fumpston venue, which is this one in 2022. So I can save this. Oh, purpose. Where's my purpose? Here it is. I've set up some special stuff behind the scenes. So it's for an exhibition. Lovely. So if I go back to that exhibition venue, you can see that there's an activity link to it now. So we have our inward loan. We might decide that as part of that inward loan, we have to have a condition report made for some objects. And that might be for those loaned items once we've made them, but we could also say it's for 2 of these items. We can make a condition report that's proposed. Oh, open up the right one. Most of the time you're not doing this all on the same day, but I'm just trying to show you the web of relationships that you can make between all of these different activities. So we've got our procedural status as, oh, click in the wrong place. It's requested. We've decided to request that they get looked at before they go on to exhibition. CR1, priority high. Helps if I spell high, right? There we go. And I don't want to fill in the condition yet. It's been requested by, let's say, Bill, and he's requested it today. And the reason he's requested it is for an exhibition. And I want to add those same objects. So I can look up Rodney and say all of those works have to be condition reported before I'm happy that everything is okay. I can then also link it back to that exhibition. Save it. And you could continue doing this. Say one of those objects needed a treatment report. You're going to have a new treatment and you're going to link that activity. You could say that, you know, on one of those inward loans, they're happy for it, but because of it's still under copyright with Rodney, you have to get an inward rights agreement that you don't use it for marketing purposes, which you then link back to the exhibition again. You could add an insurance activity to say, well, actually, this specific exhibition is insured for a certain amount of money, and this is the specific policy we've taken out to cover it. You could add a topic that gives you some of those exhibition wall labels and descriptions about why Rodney Fumpston's work is important. You could even create a transport activity to link what courier you used and how you got it between the lender and you, and entry and exit to flag when things came in and out of your organization. You could do a risk management to say, well, what if something happened? What would we do if there was a theft? How would we be best prepared for that? And you can link all of those created activities back all together, and they all update on their own records. Sorry, once I update this one because it's been having a stored brain, or I can just see a step. Yeah, so I guess the benefit to activities is mostly to create those links between the activity files, to share those relationships. So you see one and you see that relationship to all the others that has happened. And then those all reflect back on the object in that management activities tab. So you just get this growing building relationships. So if we ended up going to this object, we can see that it's been involved in a couple of things. So we can see that history building for those objects, get a sense of all the things that's been involved in, all those processes. We can see a schedule for when things will be free and when it's going to be busy. Yeah, it's creating that processes that you're already doing, but mostly in your head, and putting it down somewhere that everyone else can see. There is a lot of work to setting up an activity, I'm not going to lie. It's always the difficult part is starting when it's blank, figuring out what your processes are. But there is just such a benefit to the long life of an object that often extends far beyond any individual staff, to knowing all the exhibition history, to knowing all of the condition reports it might have had in one place, to knowing if it's been considered for de-accession before. Or in the case I had where we had an object that just kept repeatedly being brought up for acquisition and was turned down, and the research was redone many times by lots of different staff. But because that knowledge wasn't being passed down over a 15-year period with the staff changes, all of that work was just getting repeatedly redone because they didn't know that it had already been discounted at some point previously. So, you know, short term, a little bit of work, but long term, it just pays off with that richness of data.